Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop, a dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, land, sun, and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niyatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Hoya gelna Diksha.
Diksha.
Dikson.
Hoya. Hoya ne Samalia. Samalia.
So good morning to everybody, Kimbo Tutin children and everybody there.
Oh yeah. That day I'm going to Geshe Thabkhe. Then June the neighbor Shindukas. Give it a drop over Jubalas. Getting Dilla Pembo Madruna, Chindi and Jovakala and Urus. Oishe Sumbataro. Razo Tanda Milito Devate. Shirtubalia Mekumba Metelwa. Dead and Chevasura. When they change Randa, Shella, Tango, change someone Jordan Gage. Milu Keverchen, Yusungura. Oh, Tenju de neighbor Shindukas. In the Hajabe. 니바 신도 까와레스 아레스네 디 큐투바 신도 까와레스 보다 야 디질라
Mm. So, to begin with the words of the master Shantideva, he says that this leisure and endowment, which are so difficult to obtain, have been acquired, and they bring about the welfare of the world. If one fails to take this favorable opportunity into consideration, how could this occasion occur again? So right now we have this precious human life. We are free from the kind of 8 states that are lacking freedom to be able to practice the Dharma. And we also have this kind of special life, which has all of the endowments from our own side and from that of others to be able to apply ourselves to the Dharma. So this is something which is extremely difficult to obtain. And we can look at that from different angles, but it's extremely difficult to find because the causes that create such a life are very difficult to acquire.
대화하스도 대화들 메대화들 계시기도 와 인들이 끼바이네 추추발에 달로요 말을 콤바요 말을 국가요 말을 수가라 어디 가르스는 가라도 던루 가라도 통대 던루 잡실 때 되요나 아니 추추발에 국가요 말아 던루 셔와 야 던루를 지내고 가서 찍라 찍 싸워다 와 내 현지 거주도 집 동에만 모친야대 마도 최기 삼로 땅에 국가요 말아 어디내시다 이단으로부터야 나의 동해 매버셔셔배 이장자 강에날 최된 것이나 야초 주바던 텐데 국가가 요말 이다시기로 어디내시야 사와다 색바다 당와다 색배 동해 셰침부 뒤견도 용공게 냐완으로부터 되려나 야고 최주발이야 콤밤 따로 국가가 요말와 어디내시야 순감다 수메베라 세릉보세 되어도 영지 템부시다 쭉 아니지 하루와 토요일 남라 주마데베체 야 하치릉보르지 계속나 삼데 시번더부터 될이야 담부기도 상가지 계속 삼다 엔티니 바로 포함해서 되어라 다시베타와네 메버데 아니 지가 남부들이야 지치렘부터 하고 맞도 매 그래서 하체를 못 남수 껴와 어디도 하체를 뭐 아니 수당 숙미시 땡지 땡부시다 좀이야 시지시야로 데리게 요르다 어디서 소소키오도 수당가 내콤바레스도 앞에 예름 부지 때네 땡지 소로 왔다 샴바 템보르지 때 대마도 에디 미세 타르바탐지 기부트여요 이나신 데베 하tin데 이나고 남이 치다셔 남바리엔이 수다티로데 지들파 영다로 쩌네 kötübe kukames kesu kanka mekumbe ne yesugudo mekumbe ne shimi mai be mekumbe ne yisugudo otiropsi.
So these 8 states of freedom, if we don't have that kind of leisure or freedom, we're unable to practice the Dharma. So think if you were to be born as an animal, the life of an animal involves really having to eat other animals or be eaten by others, trying to just stay alive, being forced to work for others and so forth. And you don't have the kind of freedom to be able to engage in the Dharma. Or if you were born as a hungry ghost, as a preta, your whole life is spent just trying to find food and drink, just trying to have enough sustenance. You don't have the ability to think of Dharma. Or if you're born in one of the hells where you're constantly subjected to burning and sort of a torture almost, you don't have the kind of leisure to think of the Dharma as long as you are subjected to such heinous kind of torture. And on the other hand, if you were born as a being like a long-lived God, or say in the higher sort of meditative concentrations, you have a really stable kind of life. Like say you have attained the 4th concentration, the 4th meditative concentration, one will be in this kind of meditative equipoise, this sort of non-conceptual, non-thinking kind of meditative equipoise for a very long time. And although that is quite stable, there's no opportunity, no thought of the Dharma at all. One has this kind of mental stability and remains in a sort of meditative equipoise. But there are no virtuous thoughts in terms of striving for liberation or the state of omniscience. And you have the kind of state of a long-lived God. Again, it's a long life where they're enjoying all kinds of indulgences of the senses, surrounded by those kinds of enjoyments and distracted by that. Again, no one in that kind of rebirth has the thought of engaging in Dharma. So those are the four sort of non-human states of lacking leisure, and they're the four human states that lack leisure.
Oh yeah, yeah. Mili kiba inaya siyo no. Mili kiba inaya ko. Oh, yu tagob to kiba se. Sanje ki chu. Nebe kelon pamata. Kinyi pamala soba. Oh, mesa ki yu le yu tagob siyo. Oh, yu tagob siyo. Yachi ombu matama to kiba inaya rwa. Kuka baso yala matama. Chishin yamba. Mi loda chen. Yoanga chi yomare le chumde yomare. Oh, Rava. Sanje da chu la sopa. Kinte kaya yomare se. Kanda ikwa chena da kyo chena. Debu yaga da tuwa yomare. Oh, tini ya tawa chu suma wala sopa. Oh, tinte li kiwa yina ya. Mili kena ya ho chutuba. Chutuba tingi sangi yomare. Oh ya tishi di lamna. Tinte li maji ba sonda ngarazo. Chutuba telware kumbare. Tinte kiwa yini chutuba telware sopa.
So even if you are born as a human, there are kinds of situations in which you don't have the freedom or leisure to practice the Dharma. Like if one is born in a really remote area, a sort of hinterland, where there is no trace of the Buddha Dharma, there isn't a kind of fourfold Sangha with monks and nuns and so forth, one doesn't have the opportunity to practice that. You haven't encountered that. Or if you are born in a situation where you are lacking the kind of faculties, being deaf or having other kinds of obstacles to actually engaging with the Dharma, those kinds of births are really unsuitable for being considered a kind of state to practice the Dharma. Or if one has really strong wrong views, like say you don't believe in past and future lives, or you don't believe in karma, cause and effect, if one makes those kinds of assertions, like thinking, oh, there is no Buddha, there is no Dharma, there is no possibility that virtuous activities will lead to good results, that is not a situation in which you have the leisure, the freedom to practice the Dharma. And so we should recognize that these kinds of states, we have avoided that, even though those are human rebirths. They are not the kind of rebirth that allows us to practice the Dharma. So we should recognize that right now we don't have that. We have the kind of freedom to be able to practice the Dharma, having all of those kinds of conditions.
Oh yeah. Atule tawa kesu do. Del kebe ne ngazu chutu bala kumba mere tawa mere kugo yomara. Del maji biche tanda ngazu chutu ne soso ngene chuku ne. Kinjin da kanga chade do. Kab do. O del kebe resu do. Tawa kes. Ne jorba chuse. Kesa mai ba chutu bala kinjin. Shenji ngene sanku ba to rang ngene sanku ba. Kanga chade do resu do. Shenjur nga ase rangjur nga ase. O del jorba chuse do. Danjurki. O tele kandi karso was Sanje Sanjo said Sanje Chandas Sanje Keva Mambur Tosane and the Mullen Lichene Tos Delingo Bats was Sangene in the Choyor Sanje Samjit Sanje Pen Sanje Chuson but Sanje Yende and it Samjala Soba order to Chuson Bola Sanje Yamba net amase, Sanjay Chuson Banashi, net Parvada Tamjak but together, one dos Amiko together. India Nene, Parva Kovat, but Yabas, Yamba net, Manya Bashita, the net. Each year on Jubas, oh, Tende Tamba never to come Yata Shene, oh, Sosu Shangina, get the be your neck, you like get to us and get to and do awesome. Each year on Jubas. Tembaneta teaching Jews, 어디 현조가 현 그런 중간에 금이야다 제선 고요라 현대 수치 근데 temba 중간에는 아직 고요해요. 그래 현조가 현금은 상고 이게 어디 간가 차대 봐서
So, we have been born in a state where we have the kind of freedom. We aren't in those 8 states that lack freedom. So, we have this kind of opportunity, this leisure or freedom on our hands. And not only that, but we have all of the kinds of conducive conditions that are necessary to be able to practice the Dharma. So, we have those from our own side and from the side of others. So, particularly regarding, like, sort of from the side of others, the Buddha has come into the world. So the Buddha, accumulating merit for many, many eons, demonstrated, showed us, manifested Buddhahood here. And not only that, but the Buddha taught the holy Dharma. The Buddha gave these kinds of instructions that allow others to be able to practice a similar path, teaching the various disciples and that the various types of disciples. And not only did the Buddha teach, but the teachings remain. We have the kinds of teachings that tell us how to reach liberation and omniscience, the kind of path that we need to take in order to gain a good rebirth, and so forth. And not only do the teachings remain, but we can't sort of practice in isolation just by ourselves. But there are those that follow after the teachings. We have those that we can emulate, that we can also strive to be like. We have those that support those who are following the teachings. And in this way, we have all of the kinds of conducive conditions related to others that allow us to really have this opportunity to practice.
뭐야 내 란조르가 랑위나 참고 봐 내가 참고 알아 미니에서 무슨 밀리케 전주다 근데 맞지 근데 밀리케네 지셔나 보통 게 리스케 와서 미니 유으스케 봐서 밀리케 봐서 많이 봐 유으 산제기 템바 따사게 와 결론 파말라 소바 괜히 파말라 소바 산제 추송베 템바 따데 요소 유리케 유으스케 봐서 아체 따사 유리케 봐서 미니 왕보차 최신의 유나야 소소 왕보마사와 나와 세보면 저 번더부터 근데 보면 좀 겨고 번더 근데 꽤나 만들고 근데 맞지 미니 유니 왕보차 강가 차대 연계치 시에놓고 두개 근데 깨져 레타 말로세 삼명아 파세바 마세바를 써봐 그와 근데 삼명아 랑게 제바면 시엘을 제도 근데 제가 이네고 내 서부지 싸네네 근데 요마도 근데 많이 봐 근데 그거 전부 다 미니 유지 온 내가 말 내가 대세 근데 산제 송배 요아 요 얘네 숨세 내가 말로 내가 얘네 숨지 내가 대 봐서 이제 고매 있는다 지럽 일라바 있는다 얘네 소아 방배 주미 어 대수 때문에 와 먼저 라미 고반다 타바 상배주 받던데 얘네 숨라 소바 대수 이 용버 살레다 내가 대 어디 때문에 내 섬시 때문에 되더라 대봐요 봐 어 내가 말이야 이런 종아 대응하라서 간가 차대요 와
So not only do we have those kinds of conducive conditions that relate to others, but from our own side, there are the 5 sort of conditions that we need to have. The first is being born a human. Again, if we were born as an animal or something, we would not be able to practice the Dharma. And we have been born in a central land, meaning a land in which the Buddha's teachings have spread, in which there is the kind of fourfold Sangha of novice monks and nuns and fully ordained monks and nuns. And we have the kind of faculties, the capacity to be able to learn and study and meditate on the Dharma. If we lacked such faculties in any sort of way, we again would not have this kind of rebirth. And we are not thus in a sort of situation where we have committed in a particularly egregious kind of negativity, like the 5 non-virtues of immediate retribution that lead to a bad rebirth without any bardo. We haven't committed such really heinous acts. states. And we also have the kind of, again, this sort of we're abiding in the teachings, as in we are in a place where the three baskets remain. We have the ability to engage with the teachings on meditative stabilization and wisdom and the kind of ethical conduct of abandoning harm to others and so forth. So because we have, again, we should reflect on the fact that we have all of these conducive conditions that are necessary to be able to practice Dharma.
Oh yeah. Katrina nenga zo sanje to shi ten lo su chen ba da. Sanje ta nyen de chi song ba te su tan da ra yo ma. Ina te da ko te ngo su ma sa na te da chi su ten ba sam. Tan da chi song ge da ha te yo sa. Chi su ten ba san da. Te wa ge da jor ba chu de. Oh te ne ma sa me ba nga zo san de. Yan jun de ne se. Te wa ge da. Chu chu ba la ran da shan la san ko jor ba chu. Pinjin jor ba chu. Yan jun de ne. Ni bar shin do ka as. Oh de milu de to ya pe. Tu mambo je sa ne ro. Yan la so pang ba la so ba. Ani chim ba tang la so ba. Ro. Ani san je ngue tem ba dan jo am te la te dan ro ye ba malam de ba la so ba. Tu mambo je sa ne. Ani yong gu yo to. Yan jun de ne ni bar shin do ka as. Oh ti de ko ra ju milu te. Kita chene ko tunge mambo yo sa. Ro. Tunge mambo nya de ge ra nya ge shen ye tunge nyo de ge ti ki go da. Ina ha to su ina dollar to se ro tam de tam bu ni ba ha to e pesum so wa ne le long ji pesum so ba shi bi ke de o de che. Ina ya ha to so ya shi ga la mu li ya. Ke ma on ba na ya ni. Yan jo ge milu to ba ju che se olam pya ge se. Ares ne hal na mi che da re che ne ko yang go ko ne. Che tu ge tu yong ge o ma ro. Mili ke ve ne ko ne da lu do long jo le so ba ha na shi yo ma de tu nge yi rang shi che re de ngo so ko che le shu ni sam lu tang ge shi na tu nge nyong de ge mang bu ngu sum to ya yo de rang ge tu nge nyong de yo de le sam lu ta na nge ju ngu sam lu ko de ge ko ge yo ro na mi che da che tu ta te ro de cha lo so ba la pe go ko da ra ba che ne tu nge to ya me na ni ten ge ma ro shi da ha to zo ya pen je pe sum so ba de ka ge yo na che to ba li ya ni ngi ju se ro ta ye yu ta ni chi so so le tu nge ju shen ji tu nge ju de che ge ko go tang bu de yong ge ma wa kon zo ma tin de ti shin ge wa de kon zo tin de ko ma ba na che ti ne ya ti ne ka se tin ro me le che wa ju che se ma lam da ko go sang bu shi ji wa da tin de ma ra zo ke we ngo cha ne lu e la na shin ge ye ji ra shin chen de se la so ba ni la This is Lula Kim Joado. In the Prism of Yoda, Yinaya, Hanam Yangara, member. Any can you melody of the user? You pay near Kawata, Sachi Musungure, Songudua.
So even though we aren't alive at the time of the Buddha, when he came to Bodh Gaya and demonstrated enlightenment, we have the kinds of conditions that are similar to that. We have those that still follow after the Buddha's teachings and so forth. And so we have something that is really extremely precious. Again, this, as this verse says, and we see, this is a kind of rebirth that is extremely difficult to find. And this is due to the fact that we have to accumulate so many causes. We have to create so many causes in order to have this type of life. We have to engage in ethical conduct wherein we give up harming others. We need to engage in generosity. We need to have made the kind of stainless prayers that lead to such a rebirth. And so here, although we can think about in general a human life and the kind of rebirth that we have taken, we have to experience so much suffering on the basis of this body that we have taken up. It really is something where we have to experience a great deal of suffering. But when we look at this in comparison to, say, taking birth in a heavenly realm, being born as like a long-lived God, all of those things that they have that are seemingly so excellent, that kind of excellent abode and so forth, really, although they enjoy that throughout their life, at the time of death, they see that they are going to have to take another rebirth. And a lot of them make a kind of prayer to be born as a human, because the special sort of quality of being born as a human is that we see suffering. We are actually able to recognize this. We ourselves experience suffering and we see it in others. And therefore, we have the chance to develop a kind of renunciation, to be able to directly confront the causes of that suffering and so forth. Whereas someone that has been born in those upper realms, they have this kind of excellent wealth and enjoyment, and they spend their life enjoying those things. They don't have the chance or the thought of really renunciation or of pursuing the Dharma. And so, although those heavenly beings may have bodies in the nature of light, and we think like, oh, they're enjoying this wonderful nectar and these great enjoyments throughout their whole life, to have the experience of that is actually something that is a distraction from the Dharma. The kind of life that we have, even though it involves suffering, allows us to pursue the Dharma in a way that such a higher rebirth would not.
Oh yeah. 단준되는 예가 기부 전도 도와 줘봐라. 다른 나라들로 그거 소속이야. 저와 치마 팬제게 이건도 하다 미 고바 좀내 땡기. 저와 저도 줘봐라 소바 땡기 좀내 두개 그거 비와래 송거라. 기부 전도에 아니 그거 비와래 네바 예바실 때 비와래. 기부 전도 도와 줘봐라. 기부 전도 가래 센데 치부 기부 전도 말아. 근데 동네 매여다 저와도 없이 투시 매직해야지. 전주라에 요래서 미다 팀워래서. 전주 고라저치 사회 통해서 때 요래. 아니 강에서야 강요요 시시 대시 고라 빠져 지요라. 고라 끼와데 고 가래네 봐. 예토버지 지거도 와. 어디 전주라에 요래서 이거로 좀 미게 주게 말해. 근데 그 기부 전주 도와줘. 저 침마 펜제 소소 전다 주게 삼로 코트 sen desam pesum chawade kya magical lokate ne tebado penjo pesum chawaro sego nemela so pesum chawade janjang ngoko ye tondale tibasa de chedena ne laria ngara zutanda mili tobe te nyawa yeda tondro mangbo chili ke ne tar chi kale mangbo chi kamne tare chi tare de songora ne songi tungele tane mi lu ke barchen de tore and some of the Kale Mambo Jamna Togiandi, Tari Kukab Delia, Yangya Yabu Chene Chima, Mao Bananga, Sumla Sawatazul and Drum Megubachi Somaduna, Laria Yangjapa Londra, so the Chagu, the Pessim Jobo, Socially, a Mavasong, Kukab Mavasong, what in this is in the Chima Pencil, had a me Kova, yeah, Coats and Maimba, Harve net to get. Yeah, Rachi Butarwa Maiba, Simja Tamjek, Tungenge. Today, you are Changu Samlata, Yachimbo Samlata, or today, that Kukab Sabso Chimado, Yang Malo, Madus, Tungenya, somebody said Tungana, Tede, Tungenya, Chi Tardus and Kukaduma Simja Yafa, Yang Roach, and the Pepamura, or today my own Chacha would listen go right in the Yoachima Hada Mikova. Rimgi Guni, Harvada Tamjaki, but took to a chess. Yitundala Tambudilia, Joachima Lada Military, Tabshikaricha Udasana, Lunga Yusum Yukon and Migawachus, and Yunga Jusiva. This sheet, Kachambuda, that it, Ambuna Kachambuda. Oh, Shalia, Sawachana, Shala Tungayung with some Rala Chibare, some Rala Tungayung with Wastina, Shala, Tungayung with some Kunelane, Shala Sawabang. Kimle Tugre Samsa, Ulysses and Guri Samsa, the rich and they could get some Tembo Marwa. Or middle and new Guri Samsa, Soyana, Kadu Yena, Kukab Chuna, Kuko Lengi Marwa, or Tinduko. Say she's soon, Shella Tungage, rather cheaper, Shella Tunging, ranking when a Shella Tungage and Dumare Samne. So upon body. Luigi Kona Socha, Machimba Mesam. Nagona, Tamat. Yijugona Namsen Lodala Soba. Shall I say a Rusuki Kulumeva? Yegona Kulunkunela Lungagi, Sawa Mechibachi Tambuchene, Yoachima Hada Mi, Kobanto watching about to check good ese. Yat Sendela, it was Masabasa, my but Yoanga Mabusashi, but the Shakbache, Tonga Shakwala Soba, Chacha Wala Soba, Tikshache, Yabache, or Tendation, Yoachima Hadam. Mondo Lame Koba to Menge, 단다 나신 추체바티 균트는 조tum게게 땡 개발자지 도바치기 삼알했다 당보티 티레도 이부 중무색으로 안 남긴가죠. 당보티 때문에 시고란 tor사로 네 타로와 탐제 캠버스에 삼로 또 해고를 내요 말로 야 되지라나.
Mm. So, this kind of opportunity that we have right now is a great opportunity. As it says in this verse by Shantideva, we have the chance to bring about the welfare of the world. And so, here, this is referring to the fact that we can bring about our own welfare in terms of gaining a good rebirth and eventually liberation in the state of omniscience. But when we talk about the welfare of the world, we're not just talking about this life. Like, to be able to sustain ourselves for as many years as we stay alive is not the welfare of the world. I mean, that is something that even animals are able to do. Animals and other types of beings are able to find enough food and drink to sustain themselves for the course of this life. That's not what we're talking about in terms of the welfare of the world, but we're talking about a kind of stable, lasting, definite happiness. We're talking about being able to gain that kind of freedom. And so here, when we talk about the sort of bringing about the welfare of the world and the opportunity that we have right now, again, we need to remember that it took so much effort to get this kind of life that we have right now. We must have created many good causes in order to have this sort of life. And if we just kind of let it go to waste, if we don't use it at the very least in order to continue on this path, to be able to continue with a good rebirth, then that's quite unfortunate. That's quite a loss. I mean, that's really a sad kind of outcome. And so we don't really just want to get, though, a good rebirth as a human or a god, but we recognize that we want a definite freedom from this cycle of suffering. And thinking beyond that, it's not just for ourselves, but also for all other sentient beings. So here, these kinds of thoughts are the welfare of the world, not just sort of continuing within this prison of samsara, not ever wanting to get out. But we have to begin. The sort of foundation of all of this is to be able to have a good rebirth in the future. And so the very important foundation is ethical conduct. That means abandoning any kind of harm to others with our body, speech, and mind. And so we shouldn't see this as something like dismiss it as being small or unimportant, but really giving up harming others. And this ethical conduct is the foundation for everything that comes later. And we're not doing this out of a sense of like, oh, well, the police might catch me. I might get in trouble with the law if I hurt somebody. But rather, it's out of a sense of love, of recognizing that this other being experiences suffering. I don't want to create suffering for them. They want happiness just like I do. And so this is the kind of attitude that we need to cultivate in order to really genuinely develop this kind of ethical conduct that gives up killing and stealing and sexual misconduct and those kinds of non-virtues of speech, of harsh speech and lying and divisive speech and gossip, and those of mind, of covetousness and malice and wrong view. This is the foundation upon which we can definitely ensure that we have another good rebirth. And so with that as a foundation, we also have to recognize that not only do we want to avoid non-virtues in this life, but we have definitely done non-virtuous actions in the past. And therefore, we should make an effort at purification, at getting rid of those kinds of negativities, and engage in the kind of positive actions of prostrations and offerings and those sorts of virtues that will allow us to have this kind of continuity of a good rebirth in the future. This we often call the practice of this being of small scope, but it's really the basis, the foundation upon which everything else comes. So we shouldn't dismiss this or look down upon it.
Oh yeah. TV tandu toba chubala ta tanda sambo shirabati. Dolami koba chutube ten kebarshi. Kabarcha de reswa. Ya chudan rene tanda me chu yuwa na shin titu tunge ke milu. Jeba chutu sa tentia. Ye tanda la lega che tanda chube de tambu reswa. Ta tile chewa tila. Mekewa chupa kewa chuturwa. Ene chi tende ngarish tabe mekewa shabache. Tende chene pada mi cho banje to ba yena ya rwa ta de ko Koatia mi, Koatia, Koare, to make your own sincere. Nesula to de colata me, Koati Sambure, Tupurete, Inako, mi, Lucurantele, to me Mambuyore. Susugi, now Yambeta, to the Carichan Yongurasana, now Yambanga, Rawachi, Samlocor, sometimes I'm doing a Shuk Chambuyora, say round, Soboda, Semda, Soan, the shit, the Zulatene, Sobolatene, Patane, the Zulega, Chidu, Target, Chawaches, and get your mother. It is Monetega Chini Rayasik, Homara. Target should be Tamjet in the Roa, Tension Reverend Jonas, which is so. Telepa, Tanyatane. The Zuchashe to the shit to the Lega, Chidu, Koran, Chawaches, then a Tawa, some Shaku, Yora. In a Garazu Samlo Kundil Carriers, Nangas, Rawachi. She took to such years of Sobu Pasha, Sem Pasha, Twa Pasha, and that you lost your Nandu Shagdwa. O Tinding and Zindi Pass, Nurtangura, Home Maripa Sigdwa Telia. Target, Soso Tikande, and Basoso Yabushingi Omar, Chinjulot. The Soso de Soso Yabucha Hako, Soso Mok, Namjunga Zogangas, Rawashi, Ningai, Ninganzo, Konzo, I showed the Shenjo short of shoes over. There's a gene that dig that you can do that pashi to she's Dr. Serge, Darigero, and sons of the Indian, such a percent of really Koshika Jews, sons of the Sira. One nation in Diga and Zambulina me, Milikisar, Kangal, such a Kanga, Mutuang Serimato Keomara. In a Garazo, Tarik, Sajet and Dalia, me, Tondra, Bundra, Mama said it to go. The Kanga Nanzilit and Yogora. Nanzo se. Nanzo Chanja, Nanzo said, Simje Kanga to Lekora. Round the chief and Nanzo Kanga, the one to let me medeva, Chiba, some such one Yagatua. Choro chiefs, that is the Natu reaching, so Chanja 60. Until a chair no longer of the considered young Lumber, Jacobs, Yan Chulu, Yensero. After the Shanjo shook Simbusuda. Kanga Michiba in some Arazuna, she could do some yard. The one to let them Michiba, some Rochemodua. Because your carrying in some Zadua. Oh, Tim Sogora. All me, Mumba Maripa said to the Lamebas. Nanga, some shook short. Any Nazo Konzo said, Chagda, Iri Chagda Chiake. Chagba de Yona, and you can't do your good. Shenja, Nada, Nazo said Yona. This will never share that this other meeting, but the country would try to go. A Chagda will get less at any call Koyamato Yomaro. Young Milican, less some military. No, let Yamugi one get less on a call of Kormaguashi or something. Let the Yamu get Rawameba, Joachi Lang. Yan Dishi, Yan Langshi, Social Rawameba, she let the Yamu one. Kumbun Dolin Cheko, Tarwachi Cheko, some. Eat on that Judy Carasana, and then something on this Shukshimbu Machia. And Chagda, Ganzo Konzo, Chagda Shukshimbu, Ganjan and Yorta, Kondun Yorta, Najan Yorta, Tado Yorta, Yomo, the Zurich to the Kanga, Rebet and Bepapane, the Tawan and Mabason and call a Kormagovich Cheko, something. It give it on that Nibatera. Or Tinder some catching by some Tangura. Tandang Tinder took my Tinder Kawayungu, some Tandanga to be on my Tinder Chituba chicken, some Kalikali, some Lotanji Rimbe, Tinder chicken, some Jayrimbu, some Tangura. Then the Ganam Junesiva, Lozo Shinga, ABC to Shingi, but to Shingi Marina, Nachima, Kaba Tinder chicken, some Shayadua. It under ABC to Shingi Omara, Tinder Kandichi to Uresia Yomara, Komaumba, Rimbe, Yachet and Sigora. Nazo Tarba Toba chicken, Sanjay Koma Toba chicken. Message you are Zoya Yomara, Azu Terva. Kichipune, Pumbu Dolation over Mato Dagi, Quinty, Jiggy, Dead Yora. In the hearing was some time, Pugabi to Zimango Yora, Tanga Samutana. Never don't get in the shit of a chicken, some meal shower. But in the Kibi to do, Nibatele Tarba Toba chicken. You let and Yomogo on the less on the tea on the donate, Tichi Chimego, Wari Julia, Pumbundole Chimego, Yumo says, not Tarbadish, Etayaka, Condriso, EMLS. I gave to him a other came over, something around the best something the Mavisas and Tarbator. And then you went to Tira, what in Regis to watch again some Dutch any. You didn't bush, you didn't bomb a good casual madam, Mountbar. What teaches him?
So that kind of foundation, the practice of the being of small scope, of continually getting a good basis, the special kind of basis to be able to practice the Dharma, we need to be able to continuously take rebirth as a human or a god, have that kind of basis in order to be able to continue along this path. So abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in the 10 virtues in order to gain that, that's the first kind of foundation for this. But then we see that even if you take rebirth as a human, this is in the nature of suffering. This human life, even though we consider it precious for many reasons, is still in the nature of suffering. And really, this is when we look at, well, why is it that we suffer? What is the root of this suffering? We have this kind of thought of I. We have this sense that there is an autonomous, this sort of solid, real I that somehow functions independently of our various aggregates, like as if we were to set aside each of our various aggregates, we could find something that was that I, but really there's nothing to be found. We have this sort of sense of an I that's really existent, but yet when we try to search for that thing, that I as it appears to us, the self as it appears to us, we can see that it's actually something that is dependently originated, dependently designated. We have this kind of sense that within our aggregates, there's something that is like solid and real, that has this kind of independence or autonomous, that if we were to set aside our form and our feelings and our consciousness and so forth, there would be this I or this self that we could find, that we could point to, but it doesn't actually exist in that way. And so we have, since beginningless time, had this kind of fundamental ignorance, and we need to investigate the nature of this mind, look at how it is that this occurs. We have this sense of an I, and from that sense of I and me and mine, there's a sort of my side and then the other side. There becomes this sort of us and them, and we like to draw borders in all sorts of different ways, not just the sort of borders between countries where we get down to like even the particles, this is us and this is them, but we do this in all sorts of different ways, whether it's like our town versus their town, our country versus their country, this our religious tradition versus their religious tradition. We have this kind of sense that there's an us and a them, and instead of recognizing that we are all human, we all want to have happiness and we all don't want to suffer, really, that we're all sentient beings, we don't think about that, but rather think about our various divisions, holding to this idea of I and mine, and that's the other side. We don't recognize our kind of shared humanity. And so when we are in the control of that, we have this kind of attachment to the side of ours and an aversion, a hatred for the other. At this level of thinking, this level of the medium scope, we recognize the fault of this and try to begin to reduce that kind of strong clinging and attachment to mine and my side, and aversion, hatred, anger for the other. So long as we have that sense of I and attachment to the mine, we're going to have a kind of anger or hatred for that which is seen as threatening to that. And so here, recognizing this kind of process by which, when we are under the control of our delusions, our afflictions, we then engage in various actions, karma, that then leads to this cycle of uncontrolled rebirth, wherein we have to take up aggregates and cast them off again and again in this kind of uncontrolled series. So when we are able to reduce the force of our afflictions, reduce that grasping at an I, we can reduce all of the kind of attachment and jealousy and pride and anger and hatred, all of our afflictions that come from this. So this is the medium level of contemplation, of wanting to gain liberation, wanting to gain a kind of freedom from that our various afflictions, recognizing that the extinction of our afflictions, that kind of freedom, that liberation is possible if we remove all of those kinds of things that cause it. And this is really, we need to, again, have a sort of vast, expansive, long-reaching kind of thinking. This is something that happens in stages. Like, for example, when a little kid is first learning to read, they don't even have maybe a knowledge of the letters yet, but they say, oh, I'm going to become this great scholar. They're setting that as the long-term goal, but there's a lot that has to be learned in between there. And so too, we should recognize that we've been taking rebirth continuously, and there's no end to that kind of process unless we make an effort to end that. And so while these kinds of goals like liberation and omniscience, the state of Buddhahood, may seem very far away, we should hold that as our kind of final goal and recognize that we are going to take many steps along that path. That's a sort of decisive conclusion that we are striving for, but we have to do many things in order to get there. So in this way, this kind of second level, this medium scope contemplation says, I am going to make an effort to extinguish my afflictions, to gain this kind of liberation, and strives in that way.
Oh yeah. 어디 근데 당한주 대 삼로 로 고알에 때도 타러서 삼로도 고 가보러 와. 근데 고알에 삼로 땅 거라. 제가 통마 매번에 당가라서 냥되어라. 제가 집에 교인디체 다가 교인디 마셔시 미다 보이나 고 교투 누구라. 제가 통마 매번에 냥와기네 색바다 사와다 다에 동에 냥바다 지비치리 세리 또 바다. 어제까지 동에 냥이 싫어. 매버치 냥사라. 마음바나 단다 두스 냥대레서 타매버 단다 너신 때는 두스 냥이지 대로와. 야 미르치 야 던돌리치 시글치 사레스 투비체. 냐발리치 야 차다 동에 냐와체. 두체 대레 삼나. 뭐 야보치 삼나 땅에네 저와 통마면다 단다 버도 동에 냐데레. 단다 마음바나 동에 냥이제 가와 기도에 예다 던도 메키치 사레 투. 동에 마음부도 두세 대고나 빨리 가보라 삼다. 저 토비르치 요마로. 근데 갈수 딜레치 타로치 제치 요레섬 방법에 따라 주단 깨는 때는 연구하라. 그래서 강가 주단 깨지 요네 때는 연구를 마다 주미 깨밀 요마로. 현다치 송게수 요마로. 다부 차상시. 근데 그 주디 가서는 레부디 가야 요레섬. 주디 요모도 요모고 그서 레드레섬. 요모데 빠나 근데 제가 세버도 고발 렘바스게 방아서 다치 남준의 신경 son다요. 제가 세버도 고발 렘바스. 고에 내도 류도 소소레 세버지도 와. 근데 세벤도 저도 영실라고서. 시갈람을 같이 딜레도 지지 세버지 요하래. 또 마테나서. 이 마음반에 용기도가 양자시 깨지시 투스테 요나삼 세버지도 와. 이 괜찮네. 이네 레르스데 껴랑고. 다음에 봐도 동반이다 그 내를 longe 강글에 신자 총으로 신수는 세바데 연구 말아. 세바데 매나 그래 요나야 그 거기올라야 요 말해. 사베 주 사베 요나야 사kam부체 사베 요나 추도 류매나 사베 요나 그 요게 요 말아. 어때나시 랜담인데 통마면나 사셔베 요나야. 세바데 매나 깨 줄루 매나 싫어. 얘도 아니 거기 랭게 요 말아. 소소를 라와 유버체체 일루시에든 제요르도 어디인데 남중간주 또 삼로탄에 딜레 규진지 요아레서 저 통만 매번에 텐데 냐데브레서 삼로탄은 소소소소 이팜코야시와라 어디가도 이나요도 렌데멜로 코에 동에는 양양 삼나 치메나셔도서도 레레 때는 근데 동에 녀네 그제 동에 녀레 삼피 삼로탄나 네 겨치마 바담미 깨야세로 때려다 거 때도 빠에 삼로 고도 어디인데 야 디질라나 코에 동에디 야야 삼로 따나 텐데게 삼로 깨투에 요레세 내가 저 거와 거야 되고 유여산 주디 빠나 거와된 도에 요레 삼텐데 삼로 코르도 가시고 요라 야 디질라
So, here to have an understanding that there is a kind of definite freedom from the sufferings of samsara, this is something that we have to establish for ourselves, that it's actually difficult to do. We need to recognize that there is a kind of continuity to this, to our own consciousness. In terms of, although it is perishing moment to moment, nothing remains statically. There is this kind of momentariness in which there is a continuity. So we have in the past taken countless previous rebirths. And if we think about all of the kinds of sufferings that we experienced in the past, like how much have we already suffered in all of those various prior rebirths? And if we are to continue in this way, how much will we continue to suffer? How much hunger and cold and thirst and all of those various types of suffering? So there's so much suffering that is sort of like yet to come for us if we don't change the kind of trajectory or change the sort of causes that we are creating. If we really think about it, it's almost unbearable, the kind of suffering that we will experience in the future. So here we need to establish that there is a possibility to actually get to a kind of liberation, that we can attain liberation. So Buddhists assert that everything is causal. There isn't something that will come about causelessly. And so our suffering within samsara has a cause. And so too, if we remove that cause, if we get rid of it, then the kind of process that comes from that, the effect that comes from that will be stopped as well. And so all of our process of rebirth comes about due to causes and conditions. So particularly we have the kind of fundamental ignorance, and in the 12 links of dependent origination, we have the 8th and 9th links of craving and grasping. So at the time of death in particular, there's a kind of craving for existence. This is what helps ripen those sorts of karmic seeds into a future rebirth. If, however, we, through the development of wisdom, realizing emptiness and so forth, we get rid of that fundamental ignorance, that kind of seed is now bad. We don't have the ability to bring about further rebirth. So like if you have a seed that has been burned or otherwise destroyed, even if you have all the other conditions, it's not going to bring about a result. And so too, if we have gotten through, if we have gotten rid of the cause of continued rebirth, the sort of result won't come about. So here, this is, as Gelama Tsongkhapa has said, that it is by repeatedly contemplating the kind of sufferings of samsara, and particularly the process of karmic rebirth due to karma and afflictions, that we then turn away from the affairs of future lives. We gain this kind of renunciation, a desire for liberation. So it's by thinking again and again about the kind of suffering and the way in which we take rebirth that allows us to establish that liberation is possible and then make the kind of effort toward that goal.
Oh yeah. 기분 tunru토가 tun다 숨버들어와 기분 정들어와 단다데 아 기분 첨부세네 딜레장 로야 다체르치로와 인도체르로와 어디르드 가르스나 란치부 코알레 타네 디그메도 삼게오레 소소 첸디 파마다 소소 파마를 베 자와 첨부에네 파르 파르시바 마르비질 자와 치시다 미 망샤데 말 자와 치시용 거라 인도 심제 탐제 마르시바 아세 아 소소 첸디 마시다 되게 매버던데 팔을 자와셔던데 요라 파르시바 콤네디 아 근데 파마시다 마템베세 소소이테니 가르소레 니엔다바 아샤세 가르이네야 면에 다가스미 로버친게 미치고 로버체 소소메시 까네 티나시스 소소 첸데레 가르 핀체 요나야 티나시 마체베 요마레 삼고라 첸델리아로아 로보이나다 트롬보이나다 사사이나다 부부두이나다 부두 pombo이나다 가르레 저와 숙체 요나야 디 텐데 조레 티나시 마주레 디 벨레 자와시고라 담보 마르셰바 파르셰바 랑고 토보셰바 토모셰바 가르가리네 개치슈데 디나시 마주로 치가요 마레삼 담보다가 디 동엘레 자와시고라 소수치부 동엘레 타네 데조 삼르치 마다나 만디레 삼고라 소세 파말라 서버 데조 동에데 자와시고레 생가 데조 동엘레 자와시고레데 데조 마르셰바 딘템바 카디 쳔보레 삼 담보 Mandicine Cobanania Dune, so this Tawayora, etine Makine, so the Chea, so a Chekia Moral Picassora. Never member, never is you another, but persons of a Chevish so some assembly order, or tea in duty, in dress so suit and assembly to dress some which somebody sang out and the total with the indicated Samsara, Marsheba, Parsheba, Ya, Tomosheba, Tomosheba. Again, Sheba said, today you are again, best such a Shibsigishina, in dear Korea. Oh, teacher, that is it to go some. That is some catcher on out. Send the chibu Pama Marikama, Tingama, Tingama, Miluta, Chitandukola, Sobakazela, and a Pamala Sotindora. In the Samutan, the Simjan D. Amateur and Ding all the cutting Chimbushdache and D. Mercy, when this social chairman get a chadiora. Social the Tonde and Rodi, you again meet the Zutalia. Nama Karakar, social panto, Kari, Nursiga Switcha. You are chairman get a chadora. Dice Manu Mevesur, Robuta, Robachi Manu Mevesur. And the Kishpin and washing Marwa. So she killed a palmer is a troubleshooting that was a kitten, now Mitangaraco. On the Milota and Yagara, Condescend, teaching Yagara, says the co. Can they take me do I think one day? Simja Solar, so tonde at the Zulia, cutting this in Dimachi, Medo Samgura, Yangama Cheva de Cheval Sigura. Sindili Cheva de Cadichera, Young of Cadichera de Chera door. But in the Simja Tamja Rana Cadichera Pada Mada Neda Nieto Trobu Tomola Sova Puputula Sova. My you get him in this chair and dim my chair say, Yeva Chairman do awesome good. Tamje. What in the Tamje together Travache to get Shona Yabu do awesome J. Simja Tamje together Travache today. The Simja Tamja to the Simja Kanga Ocean and indeed this in Reco Mare. In the low chance I found you call Simja Yimba Samje. Together Tradu that the water Tradu you got it. Kadu Yina call Simja Yimba Samado, Nature Samza. Yina Kanga Chipa, Kadichibuchan Yimba, Danda Yimba. O today Indico, the one dollar to me, Medebe Simja Yimba some Sangmalia. Kadu Yina Utana, Sawachan and Digmare, Hamba Tugu, Samsa, Samluti, Nachi, Samsa, Samlo, Yina Pacha, Matanya, to Pantobo, Juna, Kanga Danda, some Yawachega Megare Samlutane. Paruchilia, the one dollar to me, Medebe Simja Yimba Samje. Kadu Yina Pantona, that is some Shuchi we were. Into Simja Tamjali me was said Yongora. Simja Karina Keva Mabas Yongora. Oh, Tindu. Simja Tamjag troop to get social Munera. Social Mune Tapta. Shiro Niga Tarshin, Langdur Gine, Kangashinge, Sambu Tarshimba. She Langdur Gine Tarshimba, Sambu, Chambada, Savala, so Shambanga, Samlu Sambu Tarshimba. In the Kansaj go at Chavi in some. Katekale Kapuna Kadamao, but a mute terra in some Tachegura, so so. Yurimbu Samutangura. Some jet Tamjak to get it. You and they couldn't Kansaj Chavi in some. Sanjay Kovantos terra. Kanga Pasa, Mishibe Mombasa, Landurkin, Mishibe Momba Pasa. Chagdan Yiri Chagdan Sobati Pasa. You and then top the ship of Samapak Yamache. And then Michi in some Gora. He into Tandan so Shen Chaya in Edra. Paya in Edra. Sanjay Yukovan to Vichi the Chigi, some Naripana. You Tamje Paya Darwa, Chicha Chikshina, Kanga, Sanjay Yukovan to be your Kurji, some Mambanas. Ning Taban about Moshagora, and the top to it, you are mad in Namsada. Oh, Tende some Luchikoachede, you would chimbu some Rusira. As I was thinking a lot, Janet, and letting about the chicken some. Net and then a coaching Kayo. Shujunji Pendo Chevena, Simjet Tamjel in the pant of what you say. So upon when I Simjet Tamjel is so about Simjet Tamjet the Adam Dana, Tunga Trena, Tunga maybe the Adam Madrena Samsa. And there's some Lutana Shena. Do they do Kangachura, Kibuchimbushul Kutura. Me Yaziduna, Jesu, and all the Gakoya persons over the Tavia Samsa. To me, to me the trainer Samsa. I don't have Trato Chira Yazino, Koya with an eye with the Trato Chira and Dressing Chira. But in the marriage of some Sambuki, Shin and Rosha, the show the church and get a some little Jordan. Some Lukunju is sorted out in the Simje Tamje get turned to Gengi. You can say, you couldn't Kansaj and Juachagi in some theatre 단단하게 쫀나리나 세바치기 윤대나리나 토바치 지졸 팬 토바치 지금 이삼 내가 깽게지 지금 매 삼사 어떤데 삼을 죽침부 유링부 삼을 따나 ele chanju semba semba chembo se chanju semba chembo se ra simje tamje tondo samlu tangge so semba chembo se do o tende samlu tang tu ne ti ki bu chembo samlu wa ki bu tonda trobo ki bu tondu toba ki bala tonda sum do wa o ti chilamnia mando che ta.
So that was the kind of contemplation for the being a middling scope. But to go sort of even beyond that, when we think about other sentient beings, to just pursue our own liberation alone is really not suitable. To pursue, though, this kind of great path, the great scope or the Mahayana, takes a greater kind of mental fortitude, a greater kind of resolve. And it begins by looking at like whatever being it is. For us, if we had a mother, I mean, it's sometimes debated like, oh, is a mother's love greater or a father's love greater? It doesn't really matter. Whatever sort of being has shown us the greatest kind of love in this life. And it might not be a mother or a father. It could be for us someone like an uncle or a friend, whoever it was that has shown us a great amount of kindness. We should reflect on the fact that all other sentient beings have acted this way toward us in the past. It's not just that we had the sort of one a mother or friend or father, whoever it may be, who cared for us with kindness in this life, but rather it was we have had a being like that in all of our previous lives. So in this way, taking whoever it is that is most important, most cherished to us, we should recognize that other sentient beings have acted in that capacity toward us. Other than us not being able to recognize it, we can see that, again, a mother's love, it begins when her child is in her womb. She does everything that she can to avoid any sort of harm coming to that being. And not only that, once the baby is born, there's so many things that a mother does in order to protect us from harm, to try to benefit us, help us. So we should think about whatever being that is, whether it's our mother, our father, a friend, a teacher, whoever it is, we recognize their kindness and wish to repay that kindness. And see that however many other sentient beings in the world, they have all acted in this kind of capacity. Other than my not recognizing them as such, there is not a single being. I can't point to someone who hasn't shown me great kindness, who hasn't been my dear friend or my mother or sort of my father, whoever it is that has cared for us. And so in this way, when we contemplate that all sentient beings have acted toward us with great kindness, there is this wish to be able to repay that kindness, wishing that other beings not have to suffer. We're able to generate this sort of attitude, thinking that may all sentient beings be freed from suffering. So here we are trying to develop this to the level where it's not partial or biased in any way, but just from being a sentient being, by just encountering a sentient being, we recognize their desire to have happiness and to be free from suffering and wish to bring that about. We ideally bring this to a level where there's no need to connect it to ourselves. We don't have to think like, oh, well, that's my mother or my friend, but rather, oh, that's a human being or that's a being who experiences suffering and wants happiness. And so it's not right to harm them in any way. They are all just like me or just like my loved ones. And so thereby, it's not suitable to distinguish like some sentient beings as having been my friends or some as having been my enemies, but whoever it is, wanting them to have happiness and wanting them to be free from suffering. And when we really genuinely have that sort of attitude toward others, there's that wish to help them, to repay their kindness. But in order to do so, we need to have the kind of knowledge and ability to do so. And this is where we strive for that state of Buddhahood. A Buddha is someone who has developed all good qualities and removed all faults, knows without any sort of exception all of the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned. And based upon that, has the ability to thereby benefit other sentient beings. So here we need to again think long term. This is something that doesn't come about quickly, but rather is the end of a process of developing our own mind. Again, a Buddha has sort of awakened from all faults, removed all of those kinds of faults, and developed, expanded all good qualities to their highest. So when we are even like trying to remove one little fault or developing one quality, we should think that this is for that purpose. This is going toward Buddhahood, the development of all qualities and the elimination of all faults. If we really have this kind of attitude, then everything that we do can become a kind of Mahayana practice. All of the sort of things throughout our day, if we're trying to get rid of one little faulty thing, or we're trying to develop one base of knowledge, one quality, everything that we do becomes sort of infused with that spirit. And so instead of like say our normal way of approaching things, where when we look at others who are say doing something that is good or positive, we might want to feel jealous rather than rejoicing for them. We need to shift our way of thinking, and in this way that our entire day can become Dharma. All of the little things that we do can become the Dharma. And so this is the kind of spirit of awakening, the mind of awakening. This is why it's called such a great mind, to have this thought, may I develop this all good qualities, remove all faults, attain the state of Buddhahood in order to be able to benefit all sentient beings. This is the really sort of powerful aspiration of a being of the great scope.
And data we tanjo milu kabarshan top to the Java Capdelia, to Matuna, Nichima Mambana Yanja, Yalo Nyawita to do my less outena. Neda Shima in the cook up to a Kawusita started a cook of Kabarshan Tower at Delia, there's a truth of a Chevodesumua. What do you do, Garato? Yiri Messina, Yimena Shell at Swachime, Kiniji Pemba to be some. Malhada me. Oba, to be 10 cabarches over show some teacher to get Sendilia, Imundinalia, Charlotte Saban, and Chini Pember to be and Samata. Oh, Titesa Mayba call it and to Tarwach Teguisam, getting Yemenal Condo down, I get on Tado, Curser or Tatangi, some Lucazina, Nurutangisa, Condo Nurutangisa, Shinjan Nurutangisa, Tato Nurutangisa. Tarwatovach, Yamoseve, Tarwatovach, go some to the city, some. The same jet under Pember of this, no say every another, so Kulubitone, some jet Tamjet, the order, the way you and Demba Judicer and Demba Yinaya. Mahobana, some jet Tamjet, Tartimber, took to get a Sanjay Kovan to Jurjism. Under Danda, Kosu, to the Tish or Lumosha. And it about some Lutana, some church, Yara and Dura. Another Samlutana, you know, Samlutanga Marva, also Yukshagra. Samlutana, so Yaja Doyora, Comna. Ya Kona Konda Pay at the Sembi, nobody did to her. You and the Pine Yorta, you and the Marma, so Kumdishana, Comna Lord, Major, and with the guy you may say. But he do. Don't that usually someone else. You did the 1 year on that target, Kikomashan, and did a liver shambit and did a Mumba shambit or so. Tare kugab dendre chudu so yoachima lami koba chudu be ten kebar chachida tarbata thamje kimba tobe kuchi sahne mambuchi sahne chimatuna kugab de chola tam benanta dile kubata dile mongba dis kamna so temme so shenge mongba kuba dendre jurwa nashi chagres dile mongba shembe kas dile tewanye june tagi kiko machena tewala kom tipo pa tapsi machena dile mongba shembe dese Tewanya, Tewanya, Dile Momba Shem, Dile Momba, Hemet. Oh, this and that, and you millet over the Kapsata. Tanda Dembachi, Kibu Chung Drin, Tanda Dembachi, Chine Chas, Sanje Kovachi, Chine Tabacha, Echido, Chune, Namjune, Chune, Tabacha, Chutanda, Samurata, Tibacha, Yanando, Pichigi in some, Chune Bekunu, Seta Mistamura. Or that didn't want to demand the love chamber. That's when you need to love. Or Nick, Chune Bekunu, Seta December, shows.
So, right now, again, we have this kind of life. And as it says, if we fail to take this sort of favorable opportunity into consideration, or if we fail to make use of this, then how can we have this again? So here, we need to, on a daily basis, do as much as we are able to, thinking that, you know what, I'm going to, throughout my life, not harm others. I'm going to do as much as I can to benefit others in order to be able to get a good rebirth in the future. But recognizing that even if we are, say, born as a human, that still is within the kind of cycle of samsara. We should recognize that we want to try to get rid of those causes that lead to this repeated rebirth within samsara. So on a day-to-day basis, again, in order to secure this kind of situation again in the future, at the very least, we want to gain a good rebirth, but we also want to try to strive for liberation and the state of omniscience. And so to recognize the faults of our various afflictions and on a day-to-day basis, try to reduce them, like try to reduce our jealousy and our anger and our attachment and so forth, recognizing the faults in those and saying to ourselves, I'm trying to get to a state of freedom from those kinds of afflictions. And going even beyond that, we can think about not just our own happiness and suffering, but look at the kind of positive actions that we do and think, may this be the cause for the happiness of all sentient beings, that may it go toward the happiness and the cause of their happiness. And if we do this, all of our kinds of practices or all of our kinds of activities can become the practice of Dharma. What we habituate our mind to makes a huge difference. This is the quality of mind. As Shantideva has said himself, that there's nothing that doesn't get easier through habituation. If we habituate ourselves to these kinds of positive qualities, they will get stronger and stronger. If instead we allow ourselves to sort of follow after our afflictions, we don't use this opportunity wisely, then, as Shantideva has said, what could be more deceptive than this? What could be more delusional or stupid than this? To waste this sort of precious opportunity that we have. If we don't habituate our mind to virtue, we really are losing this most precious kind of opportunity. So we should think that we are going to use our precious human rebirth in a meaningful way, not just for a good rebirth in the future or our own liberation, but in order to be able to help all sentient beings striving for that state of Buddhahood, giving rise to this kind of mind of awakening. And with that sort of motivation, we are habituating our minds to positive qualities. So here it is by listening to the Dharma that we are able to really engage in those kinds of positive qualities, develop them further and further. And so with this motivation, thinking about that kind of long-term goal of Buddhahood, we should set our motivation for listening to the Dharma. And today I have spent a lot of time with a kind of introduction. We will go to the text more directly in the following kind of classes.
Oh yeah, I'm going to do the name of Lord, and I say, come to the oh, you put to you palage, and get the Yubar Mawanam, which was soon a never, and Lamdinula never to tell her. Nicara, Yamsen Chuse Messe. In a yimba, I think God in the test your loss and in a lawyer. Then I round the woman or nam nesigua. And the tension driver you want to shave you angazo. Oh, tension driver you want. Number Sanje Lulia, and the Nazo Salu Jambe Dirkas with 10 days on the order. Tension driver you want said. Oh, that tension driver you want it. Chiribagi, Shashingire Shingimara, round this, number Sanje Beteba. Drama don't do the symptom, but the Shashingire Shingimara, in Kolia Chevachigora, Tension Driver was. Then I rounding with my namne sigdo, rounding with my namne Randing ma namne tension debar joa ma sanjebe long la tension to yas. Chiruba to yena ko Quran to lo so de tension debar joa kudan ke la tene jebu ke wa samare se jidenge cheba bo taba yana chiso taba tame tende chigi la tene joa re se shegi ora. Kudan kengi juro chene tela tene jebu joa de shegi omare. Jidenge cheba bo chigi takwa tiyan cheba podiya takwa Kurani kyumenge koso mekuge shenda o tindechile teni chunga esi sheku yora o tindi tenchin drebani chunga ti yudan kenla tenchin dreni yudan kengi pindile teni drebuti chunga ma resi cheba po shenda chore tiki paso shaba resi tiki doa cheba podiya takwa chi sheku yora nangpa sanje po ti kelingi omardo tindi chiribagi tenchin drebani chunga ti kelingi ma resi 이 고랑을 tembe 루레 틀에 얌생에 그요 말에서 고랑 주겠는데 에스야라 남바 산제 바 라데 남바 산제 바 참마 산제 좀 된데 제주 손자 땡제 레버는 저 아마와 인데 아니 그 삼제 랑원에 주바 나와나 시 템바 인세 켈라에테 만디 버레서 거 뭐마와서 남바 산제 베 주다 마와라야 뭐 템바 주바레 라완도 주바 요레서 랑원에 주바 요레서 켈랭게 요라 Ramata, Totepada, Semjabase, Umabase, Tutama Shiora, and the Tutekera, Rangobo, Ngobu Tambatuba Yinse, Mangenge Rangdet to Sungara. Yena Randing Mawa Namne Tension de Barajuma, Sanjebe Lamla Tension to Sanja Chumdendegi, Chutam Tension de Barajuma, Race, Sungbel, Sungbatelia, Kelen, Tikelen, Tension dosegora. Tension down. Ngobo nam indrugi ngoni mebarma uma tenjo ake ngobo tembatu be ngo yo mares uma bo shegora o telia tene soba chigdo se o tin dig mare tindu yo res soba chigdo se ra ngobo nam range ngo tube tindrup don de jense a ngobo nam tindrugi ngoni 매번 말고 오마반 남라 쩌신서 템베트루바 메세데 마디레 라완도 투바 요레 라완네 투바 요레에서 쩌신 뭐보 남 랑게 ngoe 투베 틴룹도 되신서 뭐보 탐제 랑게 ngoe 투그레 소소소 ngoene 요레 세네니 예번 디리스 주주서지 요레 요쿠그레서 요라 인나오네시 템베트루바 레서 나오네시 템베 요레에서 가라 토네시 템베 요레서라 틴룹도 되지 롬데서 어텐데 코라 Lumgiwar ngoyo nesule tinte yo marite, tinte samgiwar te sonza lomba samresa, Kurangi samba samresa ora. Neba yinbe, di namne che ngo sarshi mebe nesu sungbesa, o di mandikware ora. Chiriba tozo ne nangba sanji Kurangi trutale tene, o tinte tenshi debari juwa mare, temba truba re, chut samse nawa nashi rangi ngoyo truba, rawandu truba yo re se, temba mawati Quran lure yamse ke yo mares namba sanje be tenjin de bre jo sanje sungba de ke lenge ya ne ngobo nam tembar me se temba dibre nawana shi rawan du tube tem nawana shi temba re se ye ya ne parso de ke le bade me be ne re se me ra ta ye ne re se sungbe uma ba ta na rande ngoma wa nam ja thawe tende Umabana shi chigana rande su namba sanje ba rangi teba sigo no tutama rande chawe tende te ke lingre de chawe tende te chishin jo me she ba re se la ku re se gora chawe tende chishin she ba da chishin ma ma yin bar ma ku ba sam de se ba tende sam ki do se gora e tenje de bar jo a ge do Lingju shiwara, te tisha rawa, te shiwara, te samsu, te kung tangi wara. Che tsonga bre, tangi leshe nyingbu le ese, tangi leshe nyingbu long tani. Ngobo na takbar debe, chiriba nam se, ngobo nam keji ken jura shenge mare se, kente takbar deba ta. Ngobo na takbar debe, chiriba nam kente ke melembe ese, Juda ken sokbala tenjen drenen drebu chua de maren jignen cheba bochige ne lu lonju sama so yongo re takba chame chi so yonga chi yore se o tende kelen ba sigora tende kemelen be chu temba druban de bane rang tembe lu yimbe tsaro ne mele yamsa ya ke yo mare se chiru ba kuran so ne yin la tene keshe se namba sanje ba sanje ke sumba na shi tuta ma chu ge ngobo ka ga tuta ken la tene kyore 제바보 딱바치기 깨버시게 요 말을 속에 요 말을 세 근데 켈랭게 속에 속으라 유진라 때네 대신 중에 텐데 켈라네세 템바 두바 데바네세 최남 라원도 두바 라원네 두바 에 텐나와나 신가주 토와나시 템바 레슨 데바네 최셰게게 내소소 데 깨무셔 내레세 최송신스 아데 콩장게 와라 디 만dik 바레세 당딩가 마와테 속에 tende ke lenge la ngobo rawa tu tu be tu na wana shi temba ya se de ma de bores in gombo lu tu ginde de song sha ko ta go rigba tu ju pa le ja de ye bar ma wa nam se chiru ba so si go ra de ye bar ma wa nam ngo jo so ne ba ne quran ju tu de so tu ju ba shen ne ba ne ngo jo so ne ba ne
Okay.
ju oi
반대디서.
let's go namde nyela ne ba de ta ne la gu lamde nyela ne ba de tele yam je chung se me se chiruba choge koran choge lo se re se ngobo nam rawa tu tu ba yo re se judan ken la ten de lu tu kyu jin chok be ten ji de ba jo ma re se ji ten bu ki che ba bo chi ki ta kwa cham me chi ki se ba re se ya na won ju se ba ya na chi so la so ba o tin de chi tu pi yo re se la tele yam che yo ma re se ina na ba sang ye ba ke tu te ke lenge ya ten sanje chumden de sumba na she ten jin reban jo ke len shen do ngo temba truba yin se na jo thwa na she temba truba de se ate o de man de ba de so ra de ba ngo nam cho song ne ba kan ye te me to se me be ne de she song shin se dan di ton da de namba sanje po ten jin reban jo a se de ke chim se yo ra ten jin reban jo a se Kora timu mai be cheche ke nyelen je kyuta lenje che ke singi yora kora re ro kyute le ya nyelen ki yosegra sabyon de che na ku nyu ke sabyon de nyelen ki ro ba chuda lu da dro da she la so ba te su ka ba lenje che ke ro te da nyelen te da le che to te le ro ba che ne ya ke kyu jin so ba le te ne ke ku yora ngo bo tham je che ba re rang ke kyuta ken la te ne yusido nyelen kyu desigra ken sido tila roba chenge lenje chike dele sigora kita nyelen da kaga kyu imba da rarwa ina kyu da ken sido kyu de nyelen che debu de lenje cheke che o tendele tene ke kure sigora kyu da ken le tene ke kure yinde rang tumu maimbe kyu da ken la tene kige yete rang tumu maimbe kyu da ken la tene ko tu kude chanda chige Wangju chene kye de yo ma ri ngo ma ro ji den ji ne yin na den zabu len di na da lu me da wa kyo me da yin da long je me da yin da de so sang ma tham je te ji den ji che ba bo tak ba chi yo re se o kong ge che ba re se tu te ji tu yo ra o tin na shi na be ke le yo ma ra tu mu mai be tu da ke la te ni ki re ma do anga song ge ge tak bo wan sa ma yo ge chi ge di kanga soya chi yo ma re si go ra di kanga soya chi yo na ta kura ribat mebe tamji di she go ra di na ne songe de kanga yabu chanja so me sha ka re si go Tuku tezu kanka soku meduasi go. Motu mokila sobata simjela kewa sange da tezu kanka soku meduasi. Tezu kanka soni karchi gresi. Kiba polo tinte wonsa yunge chi yonada. Utsewa yunge chi injire kanka yabu mada tuku suku marese. Ti sonza ko. Jiten cheba po cheba te kelengi omare. Kala tene chungare so su le da. So su le ge wange le sange go wange. Dewa da tunge kewe shi ne da lu da lonje le soba tupi waresi go. Itu dan dewa yuwa chi sonza ko dewa nyoye da tunge nyoye ge chane. Le sangbo da ngenpa cheba le tene rang ge dewa da tunge tuki tuki rese. Oh, this go no.
Ringtar yengatis gyurgorero.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so here, then, yeah, gonagan, tis gyurgore. So here then, turning to the text, and this is on where we are picking up is on page 57 in the Tibetan text, and then this is going to be on page 61 in the English text. So here again, we are talking about dependent origination, or things being dependently arisen, in the sense that this is something that Buddhists assert, as opposed to those kinds of non-Buddhist schools who would assert that there is something like a sort of creator God, or something that is permanent, or a sort of general principle or time, or something that acts as a cause for the kind of external environment and the beings within it. So dependent origination is really important for Buddhists. This is an essential point that so here I'm going to pick up on page 61, where it says that for the essentialists, the dependently arisen nature of composite, for essentialists, so here when we are referring to essentialists, this is those kind of Buddhist schools who, like the Vaibhashikas, the Sutra school, the mind-only school, that while they assert that composite phenomena arise from causes and conditions, they assert that phenomena are also truly existent, whether that is external phenomena or like the mind in the case of the mind-only school. But they would say that that phenomena are composite phenomena are based upon causes and conditions, but yet they are somehow truly established. So here at the bottom of 61, where it says then, thus, while Buddhist essentialists rely on the Buddhist path that propounds dependent arising, they in turn critique the Madhyamakas, who assert that composite things lack a truly established essence, and they stand firm in their proud assertion that composite things are truly established and exist by way of their own essence. So here, although the Buddhist essentialists assert that there is dependent origination in the sense of composite phenomena arising from various causes and conditions, and thereby negating the idea of some kind of a creator god, like Ishvara or something, or some sort of principle, causal principle, like the Samkhyas would assert, they then in turn say that things are truly existent in the sense that they exist in the way that they appear. And so here, when Buddhists talk about dependent origination and things arising causally, there are two important factors. We often use the term cause and condition interchangeably, but when we say causes and conditions, really the cause is referring to a substantial cause, and the conditions are referring to those sort of coordinating conditions that bring about that. So again, we can't have something that is produced from just a single cause. There must be a substantial cause and those kinds of coordinating conditions. And for Buddhists, they would say that the external environment, as well as the beings within it, as well as their sort of relationship with things as feeling pleasure and pain and suffering and happiness and so forth, all arise due to causes and conditions. And so this to assert that there's some sort of one creator God, a permanent creator God who creates all of these things. There are many logical flaws to that, like having a single cause or there being a permanent kind of a cause, and also the sort of logical absurdities like, well, if it's a creator God that's supposedly in the nature of love, why are they giving things that are suffering, like famines and wars and so forth? If this creator really is all powerful and they are in the nature of love, it would seem that that contradicts the kind of things that occur within the world. And so here, Buddhists would say that that is not possible. However, then we're getting into the understanding of dependent origination within Buddhists. So continuing in the text, it says, for this reason, according to the Madhyamakas, Buddhist essentialists do not precisely understand or competently propound subtle dependent arising. So the Madhyamaka position is that these essentialist Buddhists do not actually understand subtle dependent arising. And Je-la Tsongkhapa makes this clear in his Essence of Eloquence, where he says that it is not at all surprising that non-Buddhists who assert that composite things are permanent do not accept dependent arising and therefore assert that phenomena are truly established. This is their teacher's position. So those kinds of non-Buddhists, they would say that yes, there is some kind of real true essence to things, or that the composite things are permanent. This is what our teacher says. However, it is absurd to accept, on the one hand, dependent arising, wherein things arise and are produced in dependence on causes and conditions, and on the other hand, to uphold that phenomena are truly established. And so this is similar to what is said in Master Nagarjuna's quote from 60 stanzas below that says, when the non-Buddhist proponents of true existence abide by clinging to truly existent things as superior, there's nothing to be surprised about, for they live by such a path. That's what their teachers have said. However, those who rely on the Buddhist path and propound the impermanence of all things, but in debate take the position of true existence and hold to it, are deplorable. So here, this kind of assertion is that for Buddhists who propound dependent arising, to then in turn assert true existence of phenomena is contradictory. It's sort of a deplorable kind of a position. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, some years are mambuchi. Oh, lots of Chimane Mambu loves on it. Gurgas loves you.
Yeah.
Some young to the how they are.
He's saying that sometimes he gets distracted and I need to tell him to stop to translate.
Oh, they are. Yeah, done this one. Koramba Chimbe Janse. Tangen Delia de Carsura. Wegi Kebato to Sunzu Medamada or Titsu Kushara. Yet under Saja Kebachura, Winji Koramba Sugora. Kongi Karasung do Senate de Song Shas. Winji Koramba Chimbe Jan, Chiruba Namne Tenje. Tende Ke Melension is Chiruba Tende Keling Maris. Randing Mawa Nam Tende Mawa is Randing Mawa. Samsung Badan do the Bachida Mount. The Tende Mawa Rete. Tende Chishima Maris. Or did Tende Chishin. Talk about my embarrassment. Chishin Haku Maris Shingi Maris. Ketu Rambuchin. Ketu Rambuche Kilupache Assessment. Ketu Rambuchera. Yina Dilan, Sunju Mendar, Cherubuche Suna Shichani Tiramare. Sometimes Sunju Mendar to some Mania to Dal Sungu to our content. Nebachi in Aya. To Supation Alia, Munchinal, Devashandash, Mushandajana Telekabacham, the Timar, and the rest of God. He carries no Sunju Mendar over there. Kuala and Mendar over there, Manyam Chito. Not in our cash. It's people much of Shandati shares. Inashin Ketu Ramushe. Did not Cherumushe Lomarawa. The Shishaches, Sungiot, and Dickups, Tos, Madaris to wa. O Ketu Rambuche, Tondun Lease. Then they get Tenji Tiniki Chochu, ne, Wabonam Tumido, Mawar Deva Matoba Shanam Gi, or Tupsimbe, Tumego Laase. O Ketu Rambuche. Yuguche, Taban Mete, Tende in Betcher, Tombany to Betakurua. Yuguche, I want to be temper now and I said, temper medes, tende in beches, taco. Then you would tend in but it's social troops, you would tend in by Shene, temper to by in a menanium tesum sasana tell a social troops, I and Dalia, Tusum troops, or dinner social. In the court, social troops are a Shiriba to the you would take attention to joy, but oh, there is so fast. Oh, don't do less. Then they get tenji, tenji, social name, nam, Kumido, or Joran Dova, Madoba, over Kumido, Kessa, the Tanjamba, Mare, Campaign Barwa, Campaign Barry, over someone like you or Maresigo. I know take campaign, picture, Shimbushita, Lemon, and then when you car, Tambo, Kitty, Message, this you are. Tambo Cheba Bochishani, Tigi, Cheveres, Sioma, then Cheba Kelly Yomara. UK Yomar and Zambuli Kora, Shingitas to be on the Esigora, Tambo. I thought that Shema question got up to Yomar, say, camping by Simba Mambu, Kanganyete, Jimaro, single Tondo Tabiabuch and Mado, Tigmado, Samsan, Tegriwa. Koti Kande Sigina Tendemission. Young as you can be committed more. It's 2 messages. Sigora. Taveco Yoma Resiki Sigura. Then Cheba Boy Yoma, the song gets to Yoma, Sutium. Koran rushing to Yoma Sigora. This which is a Mobuna Kumito Mao Tora Debe Matoba Shanamji. Or two simple tended to Tubaris. Nambimba Mado Shanda can get tended Shingri Sogura. To make a loss. Yeah, Tibet Chilamna.
So here, then what follows is kind of laying out some of the various positions of great masters of Tibet. So again, they will have slightly different ways of talking about this. So here, similarly, the great Gorampa, the Sakya master Gorampa, said that although non-Buddhists do not accept dependent arising, and Buddhist essentialists are proponents of dependent arising, the latter do not comprehend dependent arising precisely. So here, there are those Buddhist essentialists, and again, this is referring to Vaibhashikas, Sautrantikas, and the mind-only school. And he would say that they do not assert or sort of comprehend dependent arising precisely. So that's his way of positing this. And then we have the position of Kedrupje, and Kedrupje is one of the spiritual sons of Je Lama Tsongkhapa, but we can see here that he doesn't always just take the position of Je Lama Tsongkhapa. They have slightly different kinds of positions. We can even see sometimes, like within different a single master's different texts, there are different positions that they present, and this is or like there are slightly different ways of saying things, and in order to preserve that, we see that these appear in different texts. So here, Kedrupje then says, however, says in his dose of emptiness, except for those who assert that composite things are produced causelessly, all other philosophical systems are already aware of the presence of the reason in the subject in a syllogism that uses the reason of dependent arising. Thus, there is no need to establish it for them. So here he would say that for those other than those who assert some kind of causeless production, everyone who accepts that phenomena arise from various causes and conditions already understands the presence of the reason in the subject of a syllogism. So say, for example, you say, a sprout is not truly established because it is dependently originated. When it comes to, and there are the 3 modes of a syllogism, but the first of those is the presence of the reason in the subject. So here, this is understanding that a sprout is something that is dependently originated. And so other than those who assert causeless production, and we would usually refer to those Charvakans or those kinds of hedonists And here, it's not necessarily that they say everything is causeless, like, oh, you don't need to do anything in a field because it just arises. Like, we don't need to plant our fields and do that. But talking about the origins of like the universe, the world, as being causeless, as not having some kind of creator God that brought that about, it being sort of spurious or adventitious. It's not necessarily asserting that there's absolutely no causality. But so here, K-J's way of saying is that for even non-Buddhists, they are already aware of the presence of the subject, or sorry, the reason in the subject in a syllogism involving dependent origination.
Oh yeah. 근데 시다 벤지 샤게 총대 제잔데 들었었는데 이 사게 개바쳐부시라 사게 이제 공개 된데 송샤스 벤진데 조 송바네 지대 무디 샤라야 예제 하장 타교데 귤렌데 주 셰시로스 근데 벤진데 버르 종한테 지대 무디 바 치르도 줄라 요레스 거라 켈링그레스 거라 예제 하장 타교데스 벤데 마와데 남바 짠자레 Sanjay Chumden de la Tendri Mawadi, Kera Timu Maibres, Tevatas, Bandibri Songiwada. Teji de Ju Songbani, Juden Mudichala Yashi, Yajantai, Kera, Ajanta Wadeta, Sanjay Mato Yomaris, and the Soyamar said Mandiri Songiwana. Julian Denju Shecheros, Julaten and Drebuchonsi Kunjo Shegres. She humiliate your Kelimbe, Chiruba Madoba. Shiruba Namgi Kan, Drebunam Jule, Yavarato, Shebe, Tende, Togbadam, Mawar Sumbe, Jabar Chashes, Shiruba get and Togre Magres, in this song shat to the Chebacheque, Esigo. Ondo shares in Batar, Ondo shares in Batar, Karina. Quando c'è Simbadar, this, that's all. Quando c'è Simbadar. Quando c'è Simbadar, come mi giudo ci sedera. Quando c'è Simbadar. Come mi giudo ci sedera, Kajuki Kebashimutera. Come mi giudo ci Kajuki Kebashimutera. O Konge, Ranshengi Tebe, Tashi Kanungi Tewa, Kelimbata, Ran Shen Randi, Mawada, Kiribatu Sugora, Ranshengi Tutama Tebese, Tashi Kanungi Tewa, Kelimbata, Tashi Sesora, Tale Tewa, Kenle Tewa, Nigale Tewa, Kumile Tewa, Tishegra, Tashi, Tale Mai Shenle means Tale Tewa Yomares, Kenle Tewa Yomares, Nigale Tewa Yomares, Kumile Tewa Yomares, Tashi Tewa Meba Sugora, Kumbulutu. Into Kama Major Tosi, Ranshengi Tebe, Tashi Karungi Tewa, Kelimbatas. Chiribatu Taki Kelingera. Number Sanje Bala Shenji, Tagisana, Randa Dani Chigbe Ju, Chisto Sole, Tevatela Tagisigora. Jutan Dribuni Dani Chibachin, Kesiora. Number Sanje Bala Jutan Dribu Dani Chibachin, Kayomara. Tale Kawa Yose, Chiru Transibata. Shenji Sudu, number Sanje Ba, Mama to Shan. Rangwini Trube, Tushan, and Dribushan Kawa Yose and get the Shenji Sigo. Kenle was Ken Yimbatsam in Debukevala Sigmara, Rangwini Trube, Tushan, Debushan, Estonga Bata to Shivan. Maratandi, the common Mikitos, Ranshenki Tebe, Tashi Karungi Kewa, Kelimbatas, or Taji Kelenge Chiruba, Shengi Kelenge, Namasaje by Wumau. Nigale Kewa Kelenge, Chirubati Shar, Chirubat. Humile Kewa Kelenge, jumping by a bar, to Mevacure. Tashi Kewas, Tale Mai Sheleme, Nilmake, Mokanda. 교환하는 게 다시 교파 가요라. 타제 가루기 교와 타제 가루기 tawa kele mbate dane tendre mawaya mayilase tashi karugi kyo kele geso tendre mawa mayiso kama mechuto ina she take karugi kyo kele gete tendre mawa mayiso take sena inga tawa shirika tangi tenshi dewa kakwa meba kyo meba eba meba ta meba oa meba ro meba ade te tenshi odi sigora kakwa meba shi obu kyo na 그 안에 대부께 구하라 그 각바대야 요말에 대부 교화대 라운에 교화 요말에 각바매바 대바매바 따매바 이 따도 내바대 요말에 이 체바대 요말에 대바매바 이 체로 따바 대바매바 따 모아매바 드매바 소시네 소시도 호하단 디네 파도와 유레도 돈이 되고 이쇼시네 지도 들어와 디네 파도와 유레도 와면도 다들 되면 랑올에 찍다 다들 니수시네 찍다 맞고 봐요 말 다들 맞고 봐요 말 이송으로 다들 강가 때 맞고 반대 봐야네 타게 가루 겨 펠리 줘라 다시 껴와 가루기 껴와 켈레 바다 타게 가루기 껴와 켈레 바다네 텐데 마와야 마힐라 뚱이 마와도 오메 라마와야 마힘바르 송소스 어디버도 실람나 이 가소래 다시다 다케스 껴와 랑은에 요아렌 가바랑은에 요아레스 이제는 다케 마와도 단단 디 자시르 가서 요 말을 쓴 거라 야 그래서
So here then we have a quotation from the Penjin Sakya Choden, who's a famous Sakya. And so here he seems to take exception to the idea of praising the Buddha based upon his kind of uniquely teaching dependent arising. So he says, even the worldly non-Buddhists speak of dependent arising, for they say that effects arise from causes. To deny this would be absurd. So here he is basically saying that even non-Buddhists accept an idea of dependent arising, and thereby it sort of would seem to contradict some of those masters who choose to praise the Buddha, particularly for his teaching of dependent arising. So thus it is said that except for those non-Buddhists who accept causeless production, non-Buddhists also understand and explain that effects arise from causes, and thereby and therefore comprehend and propound dependent arising. So the way Geshe has put it, this requires some examination. So then we turn to the view of the master Karmapa Mikyo Dorje, and he is a famous Kagyu master. And here he has said, Buddhists and non-Buddhists who accept production from any of the 4 possibilities or any of the 8 possibilities are not proponents of dependent arising. In addition, they are neither proponents of emptiness nor proponents of the middle way. So here, anyone who would assert some kind of production from usually we say the 4 possibilities or the 4 extremes. This is as it occurs in the very first verse of the root verses on wisdom. Not from self, not from other, not from both, not from no cause has anything anywhere ever been produced. So here, to assert some kind of production that involves production from self, as in something having the same sort of essence or nature, the cause and the result have the same essential nature in a kind of an inherent way. This is something that, for example, only like Samkhyas assert. No Buddhist school would assert production from self. There are, however, those Buddhists who assert some kind of production from an other, an inherently existent other. And so if there is something that is existent from its own side, that is the kind of production from other that we're talking about here. There are those I believe it's the Jains who assert that there is some kind of production from both self and other. And then we see that there are those who assert that there are from neither, or some sort of causeless production. So if someone is to assert any of those extremes or possibilities, they are not proponents of dependent arising. Same if they assert some kind of production, and the 8 possibilities here is referring to those that are listed within the homage from the root verses or the fundamental verses on the middle way. So here, wherein Nagarjuna is praising the Buddha for having taught that dependent arising, in which there is no production, no cessation, no annihilation, no permanence, no coming, no going, no sort of singularity, no multiplicity, this sort of pacification of all elaborations. This is his praise to the Buddha. This here, again, if something were to be sort of produced or exist in one of these ways in which it were inherently annihilated or inherently had some kind of permanence, inherently were produced or inherently ceased, those kinds of proponents, he is saying are really not proponents of dependent arising if you accept one of those kinds of categories wherein there's sort of dependent, production from its own side or from some kind of inherent cause.
Oh yeah, that is all.
No. So we'll stop there for today as the time is up. Thank you.
Oh yeah.
Uchiche Rinpoche. And thank you, Katrina, for your very skillful translations, as always. And for those who are watching online, we hope to see you again next Saturday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. We'll finish with some prayers. May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niyata.
Oh yeah.
Due to this merit may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Oh yeah.
Binda Jema Jeongye.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Good. Oh yeah.
Record.
Malam